Okay, well, there were some questions uh, asked, and I'm trying to group them into sort of logical sections. So the first question I had, though, was really more of, I guess, an archaeology or anthropology question. It's from Dominique, who wanted to know if the site was known to be a sacred site during the entire 6,000 years. I think you touched on that, but would you want to elaborate?
I think Tom Dillahay would be best to answer that question if you don't
Yes,
mind,
for
Tom.
Tom, yes.
Yes. Okay. Phase one is about 14,000 plus years down to about 7,800 years ago. And it was just a campsite of marine foragers, mainly exploiting shellfish, some fishing, and killing sea lions. About 7,800 years ago, there's a 2-meter high mound that is built and does not contain all of the charcoal and the darkness that you see in the mound today, but it's associated with burials. So there is some kind of an initial religious sacred aspect there associated with burials. And then around 7,000, 6,800 years ago, it completely shifts over to prepared floors, small ritual spaces, some burials, lots of offerings, the kind that Jeff's been talking about with bundles, but also offerings of pelican wings, different animal parts, in addition to a lot of coca leaves through time. And that kind of ritual dash mortuary mound will last until about 3,800 years ago. And the site was abandoned. And another later mound was built next to it called Kupasniki. But the site was continuously used through time from 3,800 years forward, exclusively as a burial mound. So you have formative period Moche, Lambayeki, Chimu, and Inca and colonial burials up on top of the mound. And the most recent burial was a gentleman probably buried there about 30 years ago, t-shirt, tennis shoes, and blue jeans. That was the last burial we found. So when we talk about the site being used all the way through time, it has been, but its main function was ritual, offerings, and mortuary. Now, the people supporting the ritual aspect of it are in outlying areas along estuaries to the north and south of Huaca Prieta and Paredones. And we've excavated several domestic sites, been able to distinguish what is ritual activity from domestic activity. So I'll stop there and thank you for the question.
Okay, thank you. And there's a somewhat somewhat related question, which is why do we know why the bundles were stored, why they were stored that way and why they were stored in the mound? And do we know what they were used for?
My answer.
And I guess, oh, sorry. I guess that would be Tom.
Is it for Tom? Please. Okay, yeah, good. I'll let Tom answer because I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know either.
Okay.
As Jeff was talking about, there's different kind of bundles, and not all of them are textiles. Jeff, you'll recall a few of them are kind of junco reed bundles as well, tied in knots that contained offerings, coca leaves, shells, and other things. But as Jeff described very accurately, as you go up that ramp, which pertains to the last 2 phases of the mound building, at every zigzag up the ramp, in the corner, you find these bundles. I just think they're offerings as part of the processional path up or down to the top. And we found not bundled offerings in some of these ritual spaces throughout time, but there would be in the corners of some of these stone-lined ritual spaces, offerings of coca, different kinds of shells, green stones, malachite, other exotic stones too. But they were more formally bundled with the kinds of textiles that Jeff's talking about at these crossways going up on the ramp.
Thank you. Okay, so there are a number of questions. I'll try to sort of group them logically. There's a group of questions about dyes. So I guess that would be for you, Jeff, and I'll just sort of put that together. There was one question about whether there had been any evidence of cochineal dye, or I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, cochineal
Yeah.
dye in the Andean region. And someone posted a work on that, but you might want to address that.
As the person who asked the question probably knows, cochineal was used in the ancient Andes, but it seems to have appeared sometime after or during late Paracas times, which are probably about 2,000 to 3,000 years after Huaca Prieta was no longer in use. So we do not find any cochineal or any other type of dye other than the ones I mentioned at the site. But for those who don't know, cochineal produces a very bright red. And it comes from an insect that grows on nopal or the cactus, the prickly pear cactus leaves. And it grows all the way up into the U.S. Southwest. It's from the U.S. Southwest all the way down into Peru. It likes dry conditions. That's it.
Okay, and there's a related question regarding the dyeing, which I think you to some extent answered, Jeff, but you may want to elaborate, Donna, and this was before you touched on this topic. She said, could leaves have been macerated and then ash used and then the fiber put in without, I think she's kind of addressing the issue of vessels, because she said it wouldn't take much water or even a container.
So how would the leaves be, I don't think you could do it without a container. But yes, I think yes, they could have used ash instead of potash. In other words, potash or potassium chloride is I think it's anyways, I'm having a mental blank here. That is a powder form which you would not have to use. You could basically pour water over the ashes of a fire in a container and then add the macerated leaves, and that would serve the same purpose. Maybe that's her question, or his or her question. Yes,
maybe I can intervene here. I think Donna, but Donna, please feel free to continue to question us, write us a question. But I think what her two main queries is that, was it done in a kind of a small container where one process was done first, maybe the leaves were first macerated, then ash added on top of that, and then the fiber. And so, just had to do it all in a small container with limited water. So.
Yeah, probably they could have been, but they had plenty of water. The Huaca Prietans, they were right next to a river, the Chicama River through time. It was the ocean that was moving, and there was a lagoon that dried up, but they were near sources of fresh water. They could have, that would not have been the limiting factor, I don't think. But yes, I think they could have easily done what you just said, that they could have just combined the macerated leaves with ash and then covered it with water. And by the way, remember that Huaca Prieta textiles, none of them are all that large. And none of them are 100% blue. So they weren't dipping entire fabrics into these dye vats. They were dipping yarns, hanks of yarn, which again, they would not have been bulky. It would not have been large amounts of yarn if they were making it. If they were making the indigo per fabric. You know, in other words, every time they needed a fabric, they could have dyed the yarns specifically for the fabric they were going to make. And it would not have required a large vat at all. It could have been done inside of a gourd easily, or a small container. But the only containers they had available to them were non-ceramic ones. So, yeah. Anyways.
Yes, someone else mentioned animal stomachs as, wondered whether that was, could have been used too.
Absolutely. There's all kinds of literature. If you go online, especially all of these, survivalists, they have all kinds of different techniques that they show for how to boil water in his stomach. And, it's crazy, but, it was enlightening. I learned, I don't think they were, I kind of doubt they were using hides for that, because when you think about it, if you're using a hide, you're also then, the dye is going to, some of the dye is going to stick to the hide, and you're going to lose a lot. So I don't know. It would be very difficult. It would be difficult, I think, to keep a hide still. As any of you who have done indigo dyeing know, that you must keep the vat from becoming oxygenated, right? These require oxygen-free environments, alkaline environments. And I'm not sure how well hides would hold up to alkali. That I had not been able to research well. And I don't know how well a hide would keep the contents free of oxygen. So while I think it's possible they could, if they wanted, especially if they wanted a larger vat, I don't think they needed larger vats. I think a gourd would have been perfect. Yeah, Tom.
Okay, great.
Let me jump in here quickly. We found fragments of wooden bowls at the site as well.
Okay.
And we also found that several open-ended bottoms of gourds. So they were cutting the bases off of those bottle gourds you showed. Some of them probably as much as 25 to 28 centimeters in width. Wow. And inside of those, we found dried yellow and red ochre powder and ash, and maybe even one with some indigo. I'd have to go back and look at it a little more. So there is a container technology.
Oh, that's great to know.
Okay. Thank you. There are a number of questions about fibers. A few questions about, well, basically when did cotton start to appear in these fibers? There was a question about at the very beginning in the first 5 photos, whether it was cotton or another plant, and then when did it appear?
Well, I think, again, this is probably a good one for Tom, because he's done a lot of research into the origins of cotton in the Andes. But I can tell you that at Huaca Prieta, where they found, Tom found a yarn from phase 1, which is around 7,000 years old, a cotton yarn. But cotton is found in some very early contexts in the Andes, and predating Huaca Prieta. So, but Huaca Prieta are some of the earliest cotton. They may be the earliest cotton fabrics in the Andes.
Okay.
Are you there, Tom, or not? I guess he left.
Okay.
Tom, the question was, how early does cotton show up in the Andes?
Well, in the non-chalk area, which is tropical forest and natural cotton, the brown cotton grows there today. It's about 150 kilometers away from Huaca Prieta up on the side slopes of the Andes. We've got it dated about 7,200 years ago. Cotton bolls, okay? And the earliest at Huaca Prieta is actually 6750 calibrated years. Okay. That twisted yarn that we directly created by radiocarbon means, okay?
Okay, thank you. There was a kind of a, well, let me just stick with fibers for this time. One question was whether wool was used at all at this time.
I did not encounter any wool. Again, as I learned, there were containers that I didn't know. I know that they found hides of alpaca and, of guanacos, possibly llamas, and and deer, they were not using it in the textiles. None of the textiles that I analyzed had any animal hair at all. Although some of the packets, those little unworked little offerings, they sometimes had human hair in them. And they would sometimes have bundles of fiber that I was not able to identify also. But as far as the use of camelid hair, they had access to it, but they weren't at that point using it, as far as I know. Now, it would be interesting to know what Tom's ideas are on this, because I often wondered whether sometimes animal hair didn't preserve well, because like I showed you, there are those fabrics that have all these little knots in them. They were tying something to the fabric, some sort of a stuff, like a tassel or something, but they're gone. And I wonder what that material might have been. And we know some fibers don't preserve well at the site, while others seem to preserve just fine. And maybe, does animal hair not preserve well? I mean, we do find it in places, but like I said, it's not common.
Jeff, real quick, we found only one of 58 skeletons had a patch of human hair. So I wouldn't be surprised if any animal hair that was with the textiles decayed and just lost.
Okay. So the answer is that maybe they did use it, because I do see in many of the textiles, it's very clear that there was a warp or a weft that was once there that's now gone. You can see the space that was left behind. Junius Bird said it was the dark brown cotton fiber, but it's possible. But I've also seen that milkweed tends to disintegrate more than the cotton does, and I would not be then surprised from what Tom just said if the animal hair is not preserving well at the site. I mean, every site has a different chemistry, and it's going to preserve some objects better than others.
Thank you. Here's an interesting question. I know you spoke about the people, that only certain people were allowed to do the dyeing. But this question regards the spinning. What do we know about the spinning of fibers and who the spinners might be?
In the Andes, the north coast of Peru, present-day Peru, is associated with S spinning, where the south coast is associated with Z spinning. Central coast has a mix, and the Huaca Prieta people predominantly made S spun yarns. And I don't know if they were men or women, but my suspicion is that the traditions in the Andes are that mostly women spin, but not always. There are groups where men do the spinning and the weaving, but predominantly it's done by women, and the weaving too. So that would be my guess, but it's just a guess. I don't know.
Thank you. Tom, did you want to address that at all, or should I move on? I think there's really one more.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So there was, where am I? Oh, yes, there was a question about the tools used to make the fabrics. And I think very shortly after this question was asked, you showed the pictures of the toba loom, how they were woven, but maybe you might want to elaborate further. I guess this is for Jeff.
Well, I think I gave a pretty good description of the toba loom, but I did not talk at all about looping and netting and weaving. Again, Junius Bird believed that the plain weave was made on a loom with heddles. That's very controversial, because most people believe that heddles did not show up in the Andes until the initial period, which is the time essentially when Huaca Prieta was abandoned, around 1800 BC, right? And because those are the first archaeological examples of looms with heddles that we find, unfinished fabrics that still have the heddles in place. But how do you know whether a fabric was made with a heddle or not? Well, some people think that if the weft shots are straight and even, it suggests the use of heddles. And I have to say that that is what I see in Waka Prieta fabrics. They're not, they do not look like they were sewn or darned in, where they're taking a needle and going over one, under one, and then pulling it through. That typically produces a different, at least it can produce a very different looking textile, which is not what we see there. Furthermore, there's warp-faced plain weave, which I think almost has to be done with heddles. And that's from phase 4 context. So that predates the initial period. So I think they were using frames, or either frames or the backstrap loom. And the netting would have been done also on a frame. So I think that a very simple technology could have been used to produce many of their fabrics. When I say a frame, I shouldn't say a frame. Netting is not produced on it's not always produced on a frame. It can be produced on a stick or a piece of wood or something that's attached to something that they can work from. Netting is a technique where you're going back and forth and making these knots, but you have to have one edge, one side or one selvage of the net attached to something, and it's usually like a pole or a bar or whatever. It's not a frame really, although you could produce, if you wanted it to be a specific size, you could use a frame if you wanted. Most of the Waka Prieta netting is small. It's not very big, and it would have probably been used it would have been attached to a frame that they could have then used as either like a bag, where they were putting the lagoon period would have, when the lagoon was there, they would have had access to a lot of marine species that they could have easily gathered with nets or picked up and put into a net. And so I think that the nets were not necessarily, they didn't need these large fishing nets, because I don't think that's what, in general, not until very late in the site's occupation were they fishing that way. That very large net with the gourds, with all the bottleneck gourd, the gourds around it, that was from a very late phase at the site. And of course, it's a time period when the lagoon would have been silted up, and they would have had to have been fishing in the ocean, which would have required a different kind of net. I hope that answers their question. It's probably more than they wanted to know.
It was very interesting.
Betsy and Jeff, may I interrupt a little bit?
Yeah.
I think that we are running out of time. I suggest that whoever has the time can stay on, and we can carry on talking a little bit, because I'm personally really, I think this is so fascinating, and I still, have my questions. But perhaps we could just take a short break. For those who want to leave, I'd like to make a little bit of an announcement, and I'd like to share my screen and show them this announcement, and they can leave. And then, as I said, I'm happy, and if Jeff has the time, Jeff, please do stay and we can carry on chatting. I know that Tom also had mentioned to me that he can leave at 4:30. So this is just to let everybody who's here know that Jeff is the guest editor for the Textile Museum Journal, Volume 49. And he wanted me to announce this for you. It's a call for papers. It's about mathematics and textiles, and submissions can examine any aspect of the relation between mathematics and textiles, all time periods, geographic regions, subject matter. It can be mathematics in fabric structures, iconography, weaving practices, constructing and wearing clothing, or other topics. You can also write to the TM Journal team, tmjournal@gwu.edu. And again, you can take a screenshot if you like. But apart from that, I also wanted to let you know that we will be making a recording, and we will be sharing this recording with you next week. And so we will send you the information by email. We would welcome all feedback. Again, an automatic email will reach you via Zoom, and you can send us any feedback. And also, if you are interested in participating or just watching something that Jeff and I were planning, we are planning to do an experimental archaeology project where we would focus on this fabric that you see, this textile that you see on the screen. And we are thinking of spinning, dyeing, and twining. You will find details at www.designersandartisans.com. So please let us know if this interests you. So that's it. I also wanted to thank several rug and textile societies for forwarding our announcement to their members. That is how we managed to get such a large audience today. And I especially want to thank Sherry Hunter of the TMASC, that is the Textile Museum Associates of Southern California, for having encouraged us to go so big, and to have taken so much time. And of course, I'm really grateful to each and every one of you who took the time during these challenging times to come and watch this talk. So if you need to go, I totally understand. And for those who would like to stay on, and if Jeff, you're not too tired, we would love to continue. Shall we continue?
Sure.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, go ahead.
Well, there was one small question that I didn't get to. It came in kind of late, and it was whether it was from Virginia, who wanted to know whether all the dye colors appear to be pigments.
Yes, there's red ochre. What I believe.
Sorry.
There's red ochre. There's yellow ochre, or a golden yellow ochre. There seems to be black ochre, and then indigo. Those are the pigments. They're not. I would not consider them dyes. The Waka Prietans did not seem to use dyes. When I say dyes, I'm talking about colorants that require a mordant and that are made in these are all colorants that did not need heat, or high heat to produce. Yet they were remarkably color fast, and they're beautiful. Unfortunately, they were remarkably color fast for their day. By the way, just a quick. I know, Kartika, you have a question, but that Kartika mentioned that I work with quipus, and Wari quipus, which are dated to around 780, 770 AD, right? So we're talking 3,000 years after Waka Prieta. Wari quipus are primarily made of the pendant cords and the subsidiary cords on them are primarily made of cotton. Yet they're frequently brightly colored, and I always wondered how they got these red. They're not bright reds, but they're red, and some of them are reddish brown, and they're yellows and golden yellows. And I often wondered how they did it, but without funding to have them tested, I now believe that they're ochre. They're ochres. They're made with ochre, and they're still vibrant today. More than 1,000 years later. So ochre is remarkably color fast. It's just that Waka Prieta is so much older. That the fabrics look white today but if you look if you peer, I tried to be careful with the fabrics, but if I look between the wefts, underneath the wefts a little bit, I can still see the colors sometimes, and not well enough so that I can actually make the patterns. Because like I said, you have to be careful with these are extremely old textiles. I can't be looking under every weft, to determine what the pattern of color is, but I can see that most of them have blue and red, or blue and gold in them, or red and gold. And yes, they're all colorants. They're not dyes. Those dyes don't come in until Kupis Nike, which is at Waka Prieta. They don't come in until Kupis Nike times, which is around 800, 900, 1000 BC. Because the site was abandoned until then. There was a hiatus between the end of the pre-ceramic and Kupis Nike. There were people there, but it wasn't a major habitation. Like Tom said, there was a new mound built called Kupis Nike. Anyways. Yes.
Complete something, and I know that some of the participants mentioned that. So I'm just thinking that they might have actually used, and it ties into this whole thing of pigments and dyes. And so I was thinking that probably they may have used various colorants which could have been rubbed onto the yarns. Because even indigo, Jeff, we can take fresh leaves, and then, and I saw that several participants had also mentioned that we can take fresh leaves and just rub the color onto the yarn. And so probably that may have been one of the ways that they transferred color onto yarn. And then the other thing, just to complete this whole, the shade card that you mentioned, right? Because it's not just red, blue, yellow, and white or gold, but there was the natural color of cotton, because cotton comes in natural colors, and there's this beige or reddish beige color. And what is really interesting is also that in the oldest fragment that you show, they did what Elena Phipps mentions in the latest Textile Museum journal. It's called a chimmy. So chimmy is when you're plying two colors together, and I guess that's when they started doing that. In France, we call it chiné, and
really?
Yes, and we use contrasting color. It's like white and black, or can be white and blue, or something like that. And here, what's really fascinating is that they are using apparently milkweed and the beige of the cotton, right?
Yes. That what you said, I apologize for not having said that, because you're absolutely right. When my experiments involved soaking the yarns in salt water, I have to be honest, the reason why I did that is because I was looking at wari quipus and the ochre in them. In wari quipus, the color is saturated all the way through the yarn, which made me think it was a dye. But I couldn't understand how they could create these bright yellows in cotton. And I now believe that they were using ochre. And again, when you look at them, it's not just on the surface. However, at a site called Cerrillos, where I worked at, a lot of times the blue is only on the surface, and it makes me, I've wondered sometimes whether they weren't rubbing the indigo on, or if they were dyeing it, and also the Waka Prieta yarns. Could all of that color have washed out even from the center of the yarn if they were soaking them in the ochre, and I don't know, because indigo probably was used in a vat. If Tom Dillahey said that they were finding gourds that seemed to have blue in them, maybe they were vats, but yet there's no blue in the center of those yarns. All of it is gone. So I don't know whether they were rubbed on or if they were immersed, but it's a good question, and it's something that I need to look at in the future. It's not something that I measured. When I was analyzing the textiles, I didn't look, does the dye penetrate all the way through the yarns? I have all these attributes that I'm collecting, and I'm very systematic about it, but I tend not to try to measure a bunch of other things because it just becomes a problem, if I, later for statistical analyses and things. I may note it in my comments, but I think I need to add that as something to look at.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Were there any others or no?
Plenty.
Let's see. They may have come in while I was asking them.
Yeah.
Okay, I think there's one while, Betsy, while you're looking,
Mhm.
there was one from, I think it was Dominique, who was asking who owns the fragment.
Yes.
And also, I had asked you and you had said the Museo Cow, but are they all at the Museo Cow?
Yes, they're all now at the Museo de Cow, which is annexed. It's part of the Cal Viejo museum. Or Museo de Cow has a conservation laboratory there's a special building that houses the Waka Prieta textiles that was built, that Tom built for that purpose.
I see.
And yeah, they're in good hands. And Audubel did a good job with mounting them as well as you can do, and it's very difficult, as many archaeologists know, and conservators know, it's very difficult to get acid-free papers and mounts and all of these specialized types of papers and plastics into Peru. They want to charge huge customs fees, and it's just very difficult. And as you know, it's already expensive in the United States, and now imagine doubling the prices. It's just impossible. So she's been able to, encounter conservation quality materials made in Peru that she's been able to utilize to build these mounts that are safely storing the textiles.
Betsy, thank you, Jeff. Betsy, there are two people who have raised their hands, and I see that I can allow them to talk. So I'm going to
Unmute.
help them to become, I'm
Okay.
going to promote Padmini, who is a renowned researcher on indigo from India, to talk. I know it's very late, so perhaps we can so I've promoted Padmini to Balaram, to panelist. Her name is Padmini Balaram. Padmini, can you come? Can you come on? You just need to unmute yourself. And I'm also going to do the same for some of the others so that we can have a.
When you say Dominique, do you mean Dominique Cardon?
No, unfortunately, I don't know. I think this is my Dominique, one of the students who comes to my class.
Okay.
Alma. But there's also Isabel Langlois and Wayne Barton.
And while you're taking care of the technical aspect, I had one more question that was related. Who owns the site now?
Okay, the site is administered through the it was called the Ministry of Culture, and so that particular area, the terrace of Pagamon, that terrace has many different sites on it. It was, as Tom was alluding to, it was a sacred space. Essentially, the Kupisnike built a temple and the Moche built temples on the same terrace, right? It's a long terrace. It's a natural occurring terrace that's that elevates that is elevated above the rest of the land, so you can see for long distances on this terrace. And all of the sites that are on that terrace are part of the El Brujo complex, and that is who controls it, El Brujo, and that currently is under the direction of I'll think of his name in a second. I can't I'm blanking on his name, but he's Audubel Fernandez's boss.
It's a private person.
No, it's the government. All of that is falls under the Ministry of Culture, which is a department in the government of Peru. And
okay, I think
they control everything.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry I interrupted. I think we have Padmini now. Padmini, welcome.
Nice to meet you, Padmini.
So thrilled.
Yeah.
From all the
It
way.
was wonderful talk. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
So it was very nice to see all those things. But of course, sometimes in between, I was getting knocked out, so that couldn't hear something and something I might have missed. So I had also asked one thing is, like you said about some colors, no? I couldn't kind of quite follow it. I had sent it by writing there. I think it is gone because I got signed out.
Okay. What is the question?
No. The question was basically that you said, you see, one thing is, of course, what you, before the question, I'll say that you said about rubbing, when you rub the indigo and then try to dye it, it remains temporarily. It dyes, but it colors, but it doesn't go through and through into the yarn. And rubbing fastness of indigo is very poor. So when it remains within the surface, it will not dye very well.
Yeah.
That's a very
So
good.
it will color temporarily, but it will not be a good way to dye.
Are you referring to rubbing actual powdered indigo on the yarns, or are you talking about when you have a very concentrated vat and the indigo tends to clump?
I'm talking about what you talked about, rubbing the fresh leaves.
Yeah, that's me. I have to take blame for that. So I was repeating what some of the audience had suggested.
Yeah.
And, it is something that very often hobbyists and I know that Roland Ricketts also, suggests that we can do this where they harvest very fresh leaves and immediately put the leaves into ice, and then they kind of use that, and then they get the dye onto the fiber.
Oh, so they're using the leaves themselves to rub. Oh, I never heard of that before. So in Africa, for instance, there's one part of Africa where the people actually take the powdered indigo and they pound it into the fabrics. And I thought you were talking about a mechanical process like that. Okay, so no, you're talking about rubbing the leaves to directly transfer the indigotin on, which would work theoretically because you're not getting the oxidation in between, right?
Yes, I believe Catherine Ellis, if you're here, if you would like to come and talk to us, we would be very happy to have you talk to us.
But it's an interesting, that's a very interesting observation, Padmini, because what I've read is that the indigo, that really strong vats aren't always as good as weaker vats, because what happened, because apparently the indigo tin has to penetrate into the actual molecules of the fibers in order for it to be color fast. And if you're, and so you, it's the multiple dipping in not extremely strong vats that allow the color to build up and remain color fast. But if the dye forms on the outside of the fiber and not in the actual structure of the fibers, it crocks, it comes off, it rubs off, and so it makes complete sense that if you're rubbing with leaves, it would rub off because it's not penetrating the internal structure of the fibers.
Yes, that's exactly what happens. Because it looks color, I mean, it will take a little bit of color, of course, unevenly, but
Yeah.
it won't be permanent. I mean, just for fun, it is okay. To do a small little workshop, it is okay, but it won't remain. It will go away after some time.
Not for
Because
1,200.
I did lot of experiments with various methods, so I'm telling you from my experience.
That's one of the luxuries of living in India, because you have access to enough leaves of indigo fir that you can waste them like that. Here, my goodness, it's precious.
Yeah, I mean, actually, they can grow wild also outside my house.
Not here.
Yeah.
You have to
So
wait
this
all
is
the way
fun.
until, I have to wait now till summer before I can get any more. But
So one can try that out. So actually, I was thinking of planting some now, so that I can try some of them. But I'm now at different place, so I don't have that facility. I'll retire soon, so I'll go home and then do all those.
yeah, it is fun.
But it gives a lot of colors. I've tried dyeing yellow. I tried dyeing red. I tried dyeing all sorts of colors with indigo.
With indigo, right? With indigo leaves. Yeah.
I mean, not just leaves with indigo. Yeah, I mean, various methods. It's not just one.
Yeah.
And so you've been able to produce multiple colors with indigo.
Yes.
Because indigo has all these colors in it.
The Rubin.
Yeah, the Indirubin, yeah.
Yeah, indigo rubin gives you red. This thing gives you. I mean, these colors are there. So
maybe Catherine, would you like to tell us anything about dyeing with fresh leaves or?
Sure. I don't do it as a regular practice, but I have experimented with it. And by very, very aggressively rubbing those fresh leaves into a textile, a cotton textile, it does make a color that lasts. It's very fast to light, which surprised me. I haven't done a lot of rub fast testing with it, but I'm guessing that if it's worked in there aggressively enough, that it might get inside the fiber. And that is so much more like what was described as the process with the ochre too. I just find that fascinating that might be a possibility.
Yeah.
That all of those colors came from the ochre, and possibly the indigo leaves could have been used directly as well.
Yeah.
So thank you. Thanks for bringing that to my attention. I just find it's very interesting.
Yeah, thank you, Kartika. That was a really important. I think, you know, when I do these talks, you know, I put so much time into them, and I'm always hoping that there'll be something new that comes out of it, and you know it's just so rewarding when that happens, you know. And
can I say just a little word?
Yes. Hi, nice
Thank
to meet
you. It was
Catherine,
really interesting and really impressed by the quality of the people that work for making these fabrics back so far away in time. And about the indigo, I have tried myself with the fresh leaf indigo, and I've done some dyeing with it by brushing the fresh leaf and also by pounding them and washing them, and it's color fast so far. on protein fiber, also on cotton fiber, with the Japanese indigo, Persicaria tinctoria.
That's a different indigo. That's a different indigo. That takes it. That's the chemistry of that indigo is different.
Yeah.
I worked with Japanese indigo, and they do a lot of fresh dyeing with it, fresh leaf dyeing with it, and that's a different indigo.
Yeah, and it's nice because it can grow in Canada where we have a very big winter and cold winter. So it can grow fast enough during just the summertime.
I would like to continue on this topic of indigo and just tell you about a rare plant which is grown in Assam in Northeast India. It's called Marsdenia Tinctoria. I'm sure Padmini knows about it. Apparently that, and I'm tying that up with what Catherine just mentioned about aggressive, aggressively putting the dye or the pigment, rather not dye, the pigment onto the fiber. And I have read that in Assam, they macerate the leaves and then they massage the cotton yarn with these leaves and whatever, whatever substance it is. I'm sure they add other things as well to it. And I know that in the northeast of India, as well as in Bangladesh, especially when they were making the very, very fine Dhaka muslin, they used to do a lot of massaging of the yarns. They knead the yarns with whatever substance. So it's really interesting to see when Catherine says aggressive. I don't know what she does, if she pounds the yarns or if, like in Nigeria, Jeff, you were mentioning that the, hammer the indigo in. I thought they were really doing that to glaze the fabrics. I don't know if they add extra pigment. But yeah, this idea of really pounding or massaging and really making impregnate is a very interesting idea.
Actually, you might get my article on Assam indigo soon after some time because it's getting printed by Okinawa Museum in their book in Japanese as well as English, hopefully.
Okay, well, I will be sure to communicate it to everybody. But maybe if you can let me know when it comes out, I'll definitely communicate.
Yeah. Okay.
I had a question. Someone typed in the chat who just wanted to have the name of the Assam indigo. She says Latin optional, but she just wanted to know the spelling.
Marsdenia. Marsdenia. Marsdenia.
Okay, could you repeat, please, and I'll type it in the chat. NER?
M-A-R, Marsdenia, E-D-E-N-I-A. Now, don't get me, don't catch me on this. There may be one E less or more, but it's basically Marsdenia.
Oh, M-A-R, not N-E-R. Okay, hold on.
As in made, M as in
Okay, I'm putting that.
That's not the main name of the indigo.
You are the expert, Padmini. You tell us.
No, it was earlier known as Strobilanthus flaccidifolius and Strobilanthus clusia.
Okay. So is it part of the Strobilanthus group?
Marsdenia is a different group. It could be that is rarely used, not so much.
Yeah, it's a very rare dye. Yes, they do Strobilanthus clusia as well. In
Marsdenia is a different. It's not a part of the same group.
No, yeah, Marsdenia is a vine actually.
So it is there, but it is not the main source of blue dye of Assam.
So is there, what is the name of the plant, the Assam indigo? Should I?
Oh, the Assamese use 3 plants. They use Marsdenia, they use Trobilanthus fuchsia, and then they use Indigo Tinctoria. Or is it Persicaria? That so there are 3. Whoever it is could also write to us, and then we can continue this discussion. I will, forward whatever I can in terms of information. There is Adrian who has been waiting. Maybe we can hear from you, Adrian? Adrian? Or Dominique, would you like to go?
You're muted.
Dominique? Oh, Adrian's having some technical issues. So then maybe we can just carry on. Betsy, do you have any other questions?
I don't.
No? Okay, I had a couple.
Oh, wait, there is one question I have here. It's a question about whether, sorry, I'm having trouble seeing the chat here. Okay, it's a question about whether when the dye was put in, and I think you did address that, at what stage the fibers were colored, and I think you mentioned spun fiber, but I'm not sure.
Oh, whether they were using spun or unspun fiber?
Well, whether they were colored, the raw fibers were colored, or whether they waited until the fiber was spun. That's the question.
Again, that's a good question. I honestly I'm not sure. They could have most likely with ochre if they were using it wet. Actually, now that I'm thinking it through, because I honestly, it's a great question because I never thought about this before. I should have, but because I'm interested in, how things are made. So I'm very happy to get this question. It's making me think about something I didn't before. So if they had used raw fiber, I don't think it would have worked very well because when I dipped the yarns, the wetted yarns in the ochre, the raw fibers become very matted, right? And they would have been very difficult then to spin later. It would have been hard to get a draft to spin. So my suspicion is pretty strong that they were using spun implied fibers to apply the ochre, whether they were rubbing it on or dipping it. And with indigo, that's a different situation, but probably they were using the spun yarns as well. That would be my suspicion. And again, whether they're rubbed or dipped in a vat, they probably were using spun yarns, spun implied.
I just remembered my question that I forgot to ask you. What I had said was, could you please tell which color you mentioned achieved by fresh leaf dyeing?
It's the indigo they were using. I think
blue?
they were using fresh leaves. The recipes, all of the recipes that I have seen in Peru call for fresh leaves. I didn't mention this in the talk. There's just so much to cover, as we know, and I wanted to try to keep the talk under an hour. And it does not seem, although we don't know, but it does not appear that South Americans or Central Americans, for that matter, ever developed the powdered indigo processing method, where they would aerate the vats and the indigo drops to the bottom, and then they pour off the water and they dry the indigo into essentially like the Greeks thought they were minerals. The Greeks, and they called it indigo, well, anyway, basically forming a dried powder or a dried mineral.
Extracting indigo dye and
Yeah.
then making cakes and powdering it.
Yeah, they did not develop that technology. So they were really forced to use fresh leaves, but they had easy access to it. And most of the Andes is either, most of the people who, the high civilizations in the Andes were in the tropics or they had connections to the tropics where they could have either procured yarns that were already dyed from areas that grew indigo, or they could dye the indigo themselves. And so almost certainly fresh leaves. I often use dried leaves in my own indigo processing because I sometimes just don't have time to make an indigo vat, when the time comes to harvest the leaves. And so rather than wasting it, I dry them, and I am able to produce indigo from them, but it's it's another different process from that using fresh leaves.
I would like to invite Donna. Donna, you can talk if you would like to. For those of you who don't know Donna, I just got to know her. Donna has been cultivating a naturalized form of Indigo subfruticosa. And she was in Charleston. So as we know, the colonial, Americans used to grow enormous amounts of indigo, and they grew very, very rich, exporting this indigo. And she started growing indigo, that she found in that area. Donna will be able to tell us more about it. And she says that she's going to grow lots this year. And so she will be experimenting with it. So we, when Jeff, you're saying that, indigo is so precious for us, I'm hoping that we may be able to tie up with Donna, or with, she also mentioned Caroline and Adrian. Caroline is a French lady, and they are also cultivating similar indigo in near Charleston. Donna, would you like to say something?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I started growing indigo in Charleston. The first year I sourced my seeds from Mexico, and that year as I was growing it, I found that indigo had naturalized on Ossabaw Island, which is off the coast of Savannah, Georgia. And Ossabaw was a huge indigo plantation, pre-Revolutionary War. And these plants, some of the plants had survived. They keep self-seeding and coming back. So I've been able to work a lot with fresh leaf on Ossabaw, and then also I've gotten seed and have been growing it. Haven't grown it the past couple of years, but I'm now at a place where I can grow a lot. And also I'm in Athens, Georgia now, and I have given seed to the State Botanical Gardens here that's owned by the University of Georgia. And so we've got a huge hedge of it out there growing, actually, that is naturalized, and we have access to that. I have access to that. So I have lots of access to Indigo subfruticosa, which was the main variety grown in Charleston historically.
Donna, how tall do the plants get? Mine never get very tall because they die in the winter.
Well, they die back. Like we've had here in Athens, we've had some nights, a few nights in the 20s, and it'll be killed back, but it'll come back. They'll self-seed. Okay. The pods fall and they self-seed and will come back. And when we have a warm winter and they don't have a killing frost, then they'll get 10 feet tall.
Wow.
Yeah, but averaging, they're probably 4 feet on up. So yeah, wish I could send y'all some pictures. This past summer out at the university, at the Bot Gardens, they were over my head. Yeah, they were close to 6 feet tall.
Wow.
And thick. You could even get through. It's like a thick, hedge. You couldn't even walk through them. So
mine never got more than about 3 feet tall.
Yes, yours naturalized, Jeff.
Yeah, but mine did produce seeds.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah, but it never got tall. Produced a lot of leaves.
Yeah.
But my Indigofera tinctoria, I never have success with it. It wants to grow really tall, but it never seeds, and I never get the blue. I don't think it's matured enough by the time it dies for the indigo to have gone into the leaves.
Well, the tropical indigos, the Indigoferas mainly, need a lot of UV rays in order to develop the indigo in the leaves. So they need that. That's why Persicaria, the Japanese indigo, and some of the other will grow in more temperate regions. And so the tropical indigos need a lot of UV rays. In fact, I was working with Clemson University down in Charleston at their Coastal Research and Education Center, and working to see, we thought about putting reflective row cover underneath indigo plants to reflect the UV rays back up on the plants.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Very expensive. So,
Yes. Yeah, I use solar panels to cook.
yeah, there you go.
So
Yeah.
I think that's a great idea, get a few solar panels. It's easy. It's just, like just metal panels.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that I'll try it. I don't think I told you, but I was growing Indigofera fruticosa, and they just never got very big.
Where are you? Where are you?
I'm in Maryland. In fact, if I'm cut off for some reason by violent protesters, you'll know why. I'm very close to DC.
Well, you're in it, yeah. So did you start them in a greenhouse early? I mean,
I bought them from a greenhouse that where they had started them. Yeah. But the Indigofera tinctoria just didn't produce, but the Indigofera fruticosa did. And we used that at the National Museum of the American Indian. A couple of the vats did produce a little bit of blue, but we were using urine, and it's just not a very good way to I don't think it's the ideal solution. I just didn't know what Waka Prieten people knew about indigo vat dyeing, and I was trying to start with the simplest recipe I could think of, which would be that, but it didn't work. So next we're going to try water and ash. Water and soda ash.
Ash is what they've used all around the world in a very basic way of creating indigo. So using the fresh leaves, macerate them really, really well, like Catherine was saying. And you could add some ash to it, and then I think with that you're bumping the pH up, which is going to make it bond, and then you got the whole issue with oxygen. But I think if you agitate, if you really massage it in, I mean, I've pounded indigo fruticosa leaves and have gotten good color. They were mainly green, but I got some blue out of it. But I know the Japanese indigo you can pound. So,
so by the way, just so that we're talking about the same thing, there's all these ashes like soda ash, pot ash. Do you mean, when you say ash, do you mean a chemical? Hardwood ash. Okay, so essentially the cinders from a fire.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, you can go to a barbecue restaurant, and that's where a lot of people go. They go to a barbecue restaurant and get the ash from where they cook barbecue.
Oh, that's a brilliant idea. I didn't know that.
And as we are talking about that, Adrian is telling us that there is this theory that they used shells, and this is not the first time I've heard this. There's also Rosa Chang who told me that they use oyster shells.
Yeah, and historically in the Low Country, in Charleston and Savannah and that area, they used oyster shells. What they ended up doing, they were using it to make tabby for like building with, but also they took the shell middens from that were 1,000 years old and burned those at a really, really high temperature, and then they take that lime, oyster shell lime, and use it either in tabby or used it in indigo. And I've got a very small amount of oyster shell lime that I use sometimes with fresh leaf indigo.
Do you know, is the temperature in a regular fire high enough? Or does
you can do it in a potter's kiln. It needs to be heated to 2,000 degrees. So if you have access to a potter's kiln, you can do it in that.
Okay, well, that answers my second question then. Could Waka Prieta people have done it? No, because it's not going to be high enough. I only know this because I studied a lot of metallurgy, and that you need temperatures over 2000 degrees for iron, and they never produced iron.
Well, I mean, the way, how it was done in, before the Revolutionary War is they built these huge fires. And when I give talks on it, there's usually this guy that's there and he knows how to do these fires where they burn the oyster shells. There's this whole process of building these huge structure kind of things so it gets really hot.
Okay, so it was possible to do it with a fire, it didn't have to be.
But it's just not like a cooking fire or something like that. It's got to be a special intention type thing.
Well, the Waka Prieta, the site itself is it's full of ash and shell, and that might have been burned.
Yeah, there you go.
Adrian continues to say that we can build a fire and make that heat. So I'm thinking, Jeff, that this has to be part of our archaeology, experimental archaeology project. I'm going to eat some oysters and keep those shells.
Well, they stink if you're not careful. They'll be really smelly if you don't do something with them right away.
But if you think about it, if they were able to build a fire hot enough and burn shell, what if they didn't burn oyster shells? Maybe they could have burned snail shells or something like that, that might have burned a little easier. The ashes from such a fire would have been really alkaline.
Right. Yeah. So it's like it forms calcium carbonate. I think that's right. Yeah, calcium carbonate is what is formed when you burn the shells.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay, so we are on to some nice new, what can I say, experimental theories that we could explore. Jeff, you will explore for sure.
It is already done other places.
Well, I'm sorry. Padmini, I didn't hear that.
No, it's already this burning shells and all is done for using ash. I've documented it.
Okay.
And it's done.
Yeah.
We will wait for your book. When will it be out?
I have no idea. I'm writing, I don't know how long it will go.
By the way, Kartika, we should talk to Emily Kaplan at the National Museum of the American Indian too, because I've got an ongoing project with her on Indigo. So I want to at least invite them if they want to participate.
Yes, of course.
Okay, then there could be, if we are talking, then I have one, I have several of them. Like I covered 16 different tribes in Northeast India with their natural dyes and indigo and all. Then I have something about my own experiments with indigo, Marsdenia Tinctoria, Supriticosa and all those, as well as our traditional methods, starting from beginning to what it is today, and my experiments with it. So that needs kind of publication. So if anybody is interested more in going in detail, then I can, if there is some sponsor for publishing, then because it's very huge. So in one book, I can't cover everything. It's very huge. So it's like many experiments are there.
I can believe that, since the word I was trying to find was indican, which is where we get our word indigo from, which is a Greek word for indigo that they used based on the word India, because they were getting their powdered indican from India back all that time ago. So your history is long. There's a lot to write.
Well, historically, sorry.
History is very long, and we have also all these samples which are kind of dyed in Indian indigo found in Fustat and many places. So there was a lot of export going on.
Well, I forgot what I was going to say now. Never mind.
And in Egypt, we have found mounds. Jeff, maybe you are aware of it. I have also written a couple of articles on that. But basically, and Ruth Barnes is the expert on the Indo-Egyptian textiles. She prefers to call them Indo-Egyptian textiles. And, these were found in mounds, huge mounds in Egypt.
Yes.
And many of them are made with cotton, of course, the indigenous Indian cotton, woven in very fine and spun in very fine counts, and then colored and printed. So mordant and resist printed with indigo and madder. So actually, that's the other thing, you were talking, somebody had asked about cochineal, but there was also in the pre-Columbian textiles, I believe that around the Paracas time, they had also discovered, just like the Indians, they had discovered madder, right? Jeff?
Yes. Relbunium is the name of it, the madder. It's in the madder family.
What was the name you said?
Relbunium, Relbunium. And it produces a bright red, and it's from the roots, just like madder. By the way, I think it's the root that produces the red dye.
Hmm.
And it's very prolific, but it does not dye cotton all that well, and it's harder to dye cotton.
A lot on
Yes.
fibers.
Actually, cotton is more difficult to dye.
Yes.
Silk is very easy. Wool is very easy.
Yes.
By the way, I think we got another question that I think I saw come in.
Betsy, I think people are kind of dropping off, but we still have questions. So how about we do another 5 minutes, and then also do follow-up if you like, or maybe all of you join us for a textile club event, the Designers and Artisans Textiles Club, actually for this, where we can talk incessantly about textiles and dyes, right? So how about we just do a few last questions, and
I
then
think one of the questions was about whether there was cremation. I think I saw that.
Yes, I was
Which
about
was-
to ask that.
Which was what Kartika was asking about too. And from what Tom was saying, there seems to be no evidence that they were cremating bodies. In fact, there are burials at the site, and they're not cremated. Now, it's possible they could have cremated bodies and crushed the bones, pulverized them. In which case, he would not have found evidence, teeth or jaw bones. There's usually something left in cremation that you can identify as human bone, but they have not found that in the building material. So it's a good question, and unfortunately right now the answer does not seem to be yes. It seems to be that they were burying people without but not cremating them, but that the rituals on the temple were involved with some other for some other purpose. Then they were involved with funerary rituals, but not to cremate bodies. Unless, of course, like I said, they were grinding the bones, which we know the Amazonian people do, right? Amazonian people today, when someone dies, they do cremate the bodies and they crush the bones and they eat the ashes.
Ooh.
Yes, so at least some of them.
Would
Some
that
of
be
the
a source of
ashes.
calcium? I mean, would that be a source of like a calcium type thing
Yeah.
to, boost the pH?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness, Donna.
No,
It's a thought.
yeah.
It's not as gruesome as it sounds. It's not like they're eating a body. It's only the ashes, but it's possible, that Waka Prieta might have practiced similar rituals. But we're going to be Tom said it was all right to mention this. He received a grant this year, so he will be going back to the field. He won't be going to Waka Prieta, but he'll be going to those surrounding communities that he talked about in the Chicama Valley. And we will be looking there, and I'm sure if they were cremating, we should not find any burials, right? We should, but if they were cremating people, then we shouldn't find burials, right? Because it's possible that only high status people were buried whole, in the temple, and where maybe other people were cremated. But Peru honestly does not have it's not the norm for Andean people to cremate, at least in the Western, the Central Andes. It's more of something that they do in the Amazon. Now, I may be wrong about that, but that's just from what I know about them. We find burials frequently in cemeteries. So,
just one more question, Jeff. So the fabrics that were, bundled and put, what is the largest fragment that you've found?
Boy,
Or
that's
what is approximately the size? Like
the largest one is probably about. I can tell you. I mean, I have my database opened. If you'd like to, I can quickly look it up. Why don't you talk while I look this up, and I'll tell you.
All right. Well, I have that as a question. Then I was also wondering about what you meant by backfill, because you said that Junius Bird backfilled some fabrics.
Yes.
Like he dug this whole thing out and then he felt bad and he stuffed it all back or something like that,
Yes.
Because,
can you believe it? That's what he did.
well, I can't believe it because my mother is crazy about Tutankhamun and she's here watching us. And you told me that Howard Carter, when he discovered Tutankhamun's tomb, there were all these theories that you were violating the sacred space and that there would be a curse upon you who did something like that. So,
yeah.
Junius Bird, I'm laughing, but actually Junius Bird may have had high regard for these spaces. At least I hope so.
I wish I could tell you that was true. Unfortunately, what he did, remember, he was doing this in the 1940s. This was not considered, something horrible that it would be today, but he was finding that when he excavated from the top down, right, he was having difficulties distinguishing between floors and fill, because every time they build a new layer, they'd put a layer of fill, which included all these textiles and ashes and from burning and rocks and all these offerings, and then they'd cap that with this very hard layer of this material that they used for building, right? So he was finding it difficult sometimes to distinguish layers. So what he did is he actually made a unit where he just cut down to expose the layers, the building levels, right? The different layers of building. And he didn't want to take the time to process all the materials that he took out. So he just put them in a pile. And then when he was done, he filled the hole back in, which is why they call it backfill. And unfortunately, while the coast of Peru is extremely arid, it's also extremely foggy because it's right next to the Pacific Ocean, and the Humboldt Current comes in right in the center of Peru, and the Humboldt Current has extremely cold, nutrient-rich water. So what happens is that the ocean there is cold, but Peru is in the tropics, so the air is warm. And so you have this very damp, moist ocean air that is cool next to that as it rises, it heats. Therefore, it doesn't rain, but it creates a fog at ground level. That fog condenses, it precipitates, and on plants and things like that. And there are a lot of epiphytes that live on that condensed water, but it also condensed in this pit, and all the textiles basically became flooded with water. It was horrible what happened. But anyways, that's why they were there.
I see. Okay.
And-
Well,
In Dillahay and Bonavia, they decided to salvage them.
I'm glad. Yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
it's funny. I'm having trouble finding my table
that's fine.
that has
Just
the
one last thing I want to ask you. When you said about ochre color,
yes.
from what did they get ochre color?
It's ochre. It comes from hold on a second. There's red ochre and there's yellow ochre and there's black, and they each have different chemical properties. And I decided not to, just because of time, I decided not to go into that, right? But I do have it here for you. It's hold on. It's sorry, I'm taking.
But I think Padmini's question is more like, where did they mine it? Is that what you're asking, Padmini?
Well, okay, so yellow ochre is it's called, it's from hydrated iron hydroxide, also called, it's also called limonite, limonite, limonite.
Limonite.
The red ochre comes from hematite, and black ochre, which is also called burnt umber, umber, is made of iron oxide and manganese oxide. And they are also mixed with clay. So the clay is kind of the binding agent in the iron. They're both they work together, and that's why you can get so many different colors, you know, of ochres, because the iron oxides are going to be a fairly, you know, they can come in multiple colors, and then you've got the clays that go with them that can lighten or darken them, and or even change their color depending on. But you know, reddish clays are usually an iron oxide. They would be, you know, a form of hematite in the clay.
But I think I don't know, but I'm also curious to know. I don't know if that's what Padmini wanted to know. Did they mine this, or did they find it in, like in Utah? You go to Utah, it's full of all of this, right?
Yeah, that I don't know. Ochres are fairly common,
Yeah.
you know, throughout the world, because iron is so common, you know, throughout most of the world. I mean, and there are huge, you know, deposits of iron, you know, when essentially when the atmosphere became more oxygen, it reacted with iron, and all of that iron became iron oxides, and it deposited, you know, and so there are these layers of iron oxides, you know, deep in the earth. And so basically, you know, as they come up through from tectonic movements, they become exposed, and so they're you know, iron oxides are fairly common throughout the world. But I don't know whether the Waka Prietans, where they got their source from, if it was a local source or if they had to get it from somewhere else. Remember, they're very close to, everywhere on the coast of Peru is close to the mountains. You know, the Andes come out of the coast pretty abruptly, and mountain ranges tend to have sources of, many of them have sources of iron and iron oxides. So but I don't know. Unfortunately, I can't answer your question. My guess is that they probably found it fairly locally.
Yeah. What's amazing is that these were, it's when you told me that, when I kept thinking, okay, pre-ceramic, I didn't pay attention to the fact that you had said pre-ceramic. So these were hunter-gatherers, right? That was that.
They weren't hunter-gatherers. They did, in the Andes, they had horticulture and permanent settlements beginning at in late phase one.
Okay.
So 7,000 years ago. But those earliest people were exploiting resources from this lagoon, from the sea, and they were gathering, but they were also growing. And I'm unfortunately, agriculture is not my specialty, but so I can't remember right now when actual agriculture came in, but we know that corn was domesticated probably around that same time, that around 8,000 years ago. They domesticated potatoes and peanuts. So they were agricultural by that time, around the time that Waka Prieta was being settled, they were becoming settled people with agriculture.
But Jeff, they didn't have any ceramic bowls. So
No.
they cooked their potatoes, I assume.
Yes.
In fire.
Well, what they could do now, Tom, I was glad that Tom mentioned the wooden bowls, because what they would do in North America, they used baskets. They would take hot rocks from fires and put them into these containers, and that would boil the water, and that's how they cooked.
Yeah.
It just seems so difficult, but that's how they did it.
Yeah.
So by the way, I'm finding now the longest fabric is 104 centimeters. Oh no, that's a fiber. Sorry. Let's see.
Also,
so the longest fabric is 99.5 centimeters long, and that one is 16.5 centimeters wide. And then the widest fabric is 106 centimeters wide and 80 centimeters long. That's probably the largest fabric we have.
126, you said?
80 centimeters long, 106 centimeters wide. So the wefts would have been 106 centimeters in length, and the warps would have been 80.
Okay, Betsy, I think we must, I know that, I personally feel very frustrated when my questions cannot be addressed, and I know that questions are still pouring in, but it is almost 6 o'clock, and we have spent a lot of time, and we have, taken a lot of time as far as Jeff's time is concerned as well. So I invite all of you to join the Designers and Artisans Textile Club. We will try to continue to answer questions and continue this discussion. And if Jeff is willing, maybe we will invite him again. I hope that all of you will join us. But so I think that we must stop, and we will try to answer as many questions as that have not been answered here. We will keep a note of them, and we will answer them at the next or a coming Designers and Artisans Textile Club meetings. So I hope you will forgive us for this, but we really must end. I'll have to edit this whole video, which is going to be so long. But anyway, thank you so much, Jeff. This has been it's like taking a journey with you, an archaeological journey. I like to think of it as me going with you, almost going to the site. So it was, to me, it was absolutely fascinating. And the fact that we still have people in our audience,
40 people.
40 people are still.
Yeah. I want to thank everybody who stayed. You know, that's really great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Kartika, for putting this program together, and thank you, Jeffrey. It's been a fascinating presentation. I don't know if there's anyone still here from the International Haji Babas Society, but if in case they're not, I'm thanking you on behalf of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I think I'll sign out then. Okay. Bye, everybody. And nice to meet you, Padmini and Adrian.
Yeah.
Forward to
Everybody
another one.
else.
Thank
You
you.
can share your
Donna.
email. Maybe you can share her
Nice to
email.
meet y'all.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah. Kartika, if you want, you can forward questions to me if you'd like, and I can try to answer them.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
We'll do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll do the linking ups. Okay.
Okay.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you again. Have a great evening.
Bye. See you.
You
Thanks
too.
a lot. Very nice. Thank you very much,
Thank
Jeff
you.
and Kartika and everybody else.
So lovely
Thanks a
to
lot.
see you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
It's morning 4:20 here.
Oh my goodness. Oh my.
I'm here from 1:30
Thank you so much.
in the middle of the night. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Betsy.
Okay, thank you, Kartika. We
That
can
was-
catch up offline after this. Thank you.
Bye.